Churches may look like they are solid and unchanging, but the good ones are always evolving with the times. Take Bloor Street United Church. Its walls hold the clues to an amazing story of a church that has kept changing with the city around it. The first clue is right here. This is the cornerstone from the first Bloor Street Church, built here in 1886. That church was a Presbyterian Sunday school. The building was small, but so was Toronto back then. In the 1880s, Toronto was home to just 86,000 people, and Bloor Street was at the edge of town. It was a better place to find a cow than a church. But the times were changing. A small cluster of homes took root near Brunswick and Bloor, the start of what is now the Annex. But there was a problem. There weren't many churches nearby. You couldn't even get a horse-drawn taxi to take you to a church because the drivers didn't work on Sundays. So in 1889, some local Presbyterians took a chance. They expanded the Sunday school building into a church big enough for 1,200 people. The stone bricks came from quarries in Port Credit. The trim came all the way from Ohio. Many of the church's founders were professors at Knox College, at what is now the University of Toronto. That might explain why they chose a semi-Gothic style for the church and its towers. This is what our church looks like today. 100 years ago, it was bigger and more crowded. Students usually sat in the balcony. So many came that they often had to sit in the aisles, too. Downstairs, church members had numbered pews. Ushers, dressed in morning suits, led them to their seats. Today, we sit anywhere we like. Men wore suits, women wore hats and gloves. The pulpit was in the center back then, with the pews arranged around it in a semicircle. The founders of the church had hoped that their new massive church would be needed as the city grew around them. They were right. Over the next few decades, the annex grew quickly. Hundreds and then thousands of new neighbors appeared, looking for a church they could walk to. Our stained glass windows show one of the ministers people came here to see. Dr. George C. Pidgeon. He became the senior minister in 1918. He was also the first moderator of the United Church of Canada, which he helped to create in 1925. Back when Dr. Pidgeon was here, this is how the church looked. Notice anything different about the front? It's the wedding steps. We lost them when Bloor Street was widened during the 1920s. But the biggest change for the building came by surprise in August of 1954. A fire started in the basement directly beneath the communion table. The church had just finished a costly renovation of the building, which most of the congregants never saw. The fire wasn't noticed until morning, but by then it was too late. The church walls stayed in place only because the rafters in the sanctuary were thick 12 by 12 wooden beams. They burned, but they didn't break. The congregation considered building a new church in the suburbs, but in the end, they decided to stay here and rebuild. On the outside, the rebuilt church looked the same, but inside, it has a whole new look. The pulpit was moved to the side. At first, the choir sat on either side, but the acoustics were poor, so they later moved to where they are now, so they sing to the congregation directly. The organ was replaced, and its pipes moved to the sides of the chancel. It was a big change from the old, dark look. But part of being a good church is knowing when change is needed. It always has been and still is.